Every ranking of the world's most powerful military aircraft is built on the same blind spot. It lists the fighters, the stealth bombers, the interceptors that cost more than a warship, and it quietly leaves out the one aircraft that decides whether any of them can reach the fight at all. It carries no weapons, no stealth, no glory. It is, by any normal measure, the least impressive machine on the flight line. And yet, take it away, and the most advanced air force on Earth is grounded inside its own borders. Leave it in, and a handful of these aircraft can stretch that same air force halfway around the planet. This is the aircraft that silently sets the range of every modern war. It decides who can fight far from home and who can only defend their own backyard. It is hunted before almost anything else in the sky. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a list of fighter jets the same way again. So forget the fighters for a moment. This is the aerial refueling tanker, and this is the story of how an unarmed aircraft became the quiet center of modern air power. To understand why, you have to start with a problem that every Air Force tries very hard not to talk about. The problem of range. A modern fighter looks like pure freedom. It is fast, its brochure range is enormous, and on paper it can go almost anywhere. But that number is a fantasy because it assumes the aircraft is flying light in a straight line with nothing under its wings and no fight at the end. A real fighter, loaded with the missiles and bombs it actually needs, burning fuel hard to get to the target and fight when it arrives, has a useful combat radius of only a few hundred kilometers. Past that line, the math turns against you fast. The aircraft has to turn for home while it still has the fuel to make it back. So the radius is not how far the jet can fly. It is how far it can fly, do something useful, and return alive. And that is a much, much smaller circle. Now watch what that does to a country's air power. Imagine a nation with 400 fighters. On a spreadsheet, that is a wall of force. But if the fight is 1,000 kilometers away, almost none of those 400 aircraft can reach it, stay long enough to matter, and come home. The wall of force collapses into a handful of jets that can barely scratch the edge of the problem for a few minutes before they have to leave. So every air force, no matter how advanced, is on a leash. It is tied to a certain distance from its own runways. And here is the part that almost everyone misses, the idea this entire episode is built around. The length of that leash is not set by the fighters. It is set by the tankers. The fighter decides how hard you can hit. The tanker decides whether you can reach the target at all. So if the tanker is the leash, what exactly is it? The honest answer is that, on the ground, it is almost disappointing. A tanker is a large aircraft built around two simple ideas. First, carry an enormous amount of fuel, often around 100 tons of it, far more than the aircraft needs to fly itself. Second, give that fuel away to other aircraft in midair, while everyone involved is moving several hundred kilometers an hour, a few meters apart, in air that is rarely smooth. That second part is much harder than it sounds. Two aircraft have to fly in tight formation, close enough to pass fuel, steady enough to keep the connection for minutes at a time. It is one of the most demanding routine maneuvers in all of aviation, and it has to work in darkness, in turbulence, in combat. There are two ways to actually pass the fuel, and the difference matters more than you would think. The first is the flying boom. A rigid pipe extends from the back of the tanker, and an operator literally flies it into a receptacle on top of the receiving aircraft. The boom is fast. It can push well over 1,000 gallons a minute, which is what you want when you are filling a thirsty bomber or a line of fighters in a hurry. The second is the hose and drogue. The tanker trails a flexible hose with a small basket on the end, and the receiving aircraft flies a probe straight into that basket. The drogue is slower, but it has one decisive advantage. A single tanker can stream several hoses at once and refuel multiple aircraft at the same time. Navies tend to prefer it. Air forces built around the boom tend to prefer the boom. And here is the quiet genius of the whole machine. Most tankers are not exotic at all. They are airliners and cargo jets with the seats stripped out and fuel systems built in. The old workhorses come from the same generation of design that gave us the first jet airliners more than half a century ago. The newer ones are converted wide-body passenger jets. The tanker hides in plain sight. It looks like a passenger plane because underneath, it basically is one, which is also the first clue to why so few countries actually own enough of them. There is a phrase that gets thrown around in defense circles until it means nothing. Force multiplier. Something that makes everything else you own more effective. The tanker is the cleanest real example that exists, and it multiplies your force in 3 separate ways at the same time. Reach, payload, and time. Start with reach, because it is the most obvious. Without refueling, a strike package is chained to bases close to the target, which often means bases that do not exist where you need them, or bases the enemy can hit. With a single tanker orbiting safely behind the front line, that same strike package can push deep into contested airspace, do its work, and come home. The aircraft never changed. Their fuel tanks did not get bigger. The map did. Now payload, and this one is less obvious but just as powerful. Remember that fuel and weapons compete for the same weight. An aircraft can only take off with so much. So a fighter forced to carry all of its own fuel for a long mission is forced to carry fewer weapons to stay under that limit. But a fighter that knows a tanker is waiting can do something clever. It takes off heavy with weapons and light on fuel, climbs to altitude, and tops up its tanks once it is already in the air. The tanker does not just let the aircraft fly farther. It lets every aircraft in the formation hit harder. Then time, which may be the most important of the 3. Air superiority is not a single dramatic moment. It is a presence you have to hold, hour after hour, over a patch of sky, so that nothing the enemy flies can use it. And a fighter can only hold that sky for as long as its fuel lasts, which is not long. Without tankers, an air force is a series of brief, expensive visits. With tankers, it can stay. It can keep fighters on station for hours, cycle them through the refueling track one at a time, and simply never leave. Presence becomes permanent. Now put all 3 together, and a quiet rule appears that almost no one outside the planning rooms ever sees. The reach of an entire air campaign is not drawn at the front line. It is drawn at the line where the tankers can safely orbit. Everything the fighters can do is measured outward from that orbit. Push the tankers back, even a couple of 100 kilometers, and every fighter's effective range shrinks with them. The whole war moves, and the tankers never fired a shot. Hold on to that rule, because it is about to explain some of the most famous air operations in history. If all of this sounds like theory, it is not. The decisive moments of modern air power are, again and again, tanker stories wearing a fighter's uniform. You just have to know where to look. And the story starts before the jet age was even finished being invented. In 1948, the Soviet Union cut off West Berlin, deep inside its zone of occupation, betting that the West could not possibly supply a city of more than 2 million people by air. The West did not fight its way in. It flew the supplies in, around the clock, for nearly a year, at the peak landing an aircraft every few minutes, day and night. The Berlin airlift proved something that would shape everything after it. Air mobility, by itself, could decide a standoff without a single shot fired. The aircraft were the weapon. The cargo was the message. Then the demonstrations get genuinely audacious. In 1982, Britain went to war over the Falkland Islands in the far South Atlantic, roughly 8,000 miles from home. To drop bombs on a single airfield at that distance, the Royal Air Force flew one of the most complicated missions ever attempted. To get one bomber to the target and back, they launched a fleet of tankers, and those tankers refueled each other in a carefully choreographed relay across the ocean, handing fuel down the chain so that the very last tanker could top off the bomber near the target. Underneath the bombs, the entire operation was about fuel. The weapon was the Reach. By 1991, in the Gulf War, the whole thing scaled up into something industrial. The opening night of the air campaign ran on a sky full of tankers, hundreds of them, holding orbits in tightly managed tracks, so that strike aircraft from half a dozen nations could reach their targets and return. Pilots described those refueling tracks as some of the most crowded and dangerous airspace of the entire war, precisely because everything depended on them. The fighters and the stealth jets got the famous gun camera footage. The tankers, invisible and unglamorous, made every second of it possible. And then there is the pattern that should really make you pay attention. When a coalition of European nations went to war over Kosovo in 1999, and again over Libya in 2011, they discovered something uncomfortable about their own air power. They had capable fighters. What many of them did not have, in anywhere near enough numbers, were tankers. So even close to home, in their own backyard, they leaned heavily on the United States to provide the fuel in the air. The fighters belonged to many nations. The Reach, quietly, belonged to one. Which brings us to today, where the lesson is sharper than it has ever been, because of one brutal fact of geography. In the Pacific, the map is mostly water. Bases are far apart, and the most useful ones sit within range of missiles that can crater a runway from 1,000 kilometers away. So every serious plan to operate in that part of the world is, underneath the surface, a plan about fuel in the air. How much, how far forward, and how to keep it from being shot down. The distances have grown so vast that the tanker has stopped being a supporting actor. In the Pacific, it is the plot. All of which leads to a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. The tanker is the most valuable aircraft in the sky, and that is exactly what makes it the most dangerous one to own. Think about what it actually is, stripped of any romance. It is huge, it is slow, it is not stealthy, and it has no real way to defend itself. It cannot dogfight. It cannot outrun a missile. It cannot hide on a radar screen. And it is irreplaceable in the most literal sense, because these aircraft are few. They cost a fortune each, and you cannot build more of them quickly. A nation can lose a fighter and launch another tomorrow. Lose a tanker, and a piece of your reach is simply gone for years. So if you are the enemy, the math is brutal and obvious. Do not chase the fighters around the sky, where they are fast and dangerous and exactly where they want to be. Reach past them and kill the tanker. It is the oldest principle in warfare, updated for the jet age. Do not try to dodge every arrow. Shoot the archer. And modern weapons are being built specifically to do exactly that. A new class of very long-range air-to-air missiles now exists for one main purpose. Not to win a dogfight, but to fly past the protective screen of fighters and destroy the high-value aircraft hiding behind it. The tankers, the radar planes, the handful of aircraft the entire formation quietly depends on. Because whoever runs out of tankers runs out of war. The leash does not have to be cut at the fighter. It can be cut at the fuel. And here is the part that should genuinely worry the air forces that rely on this the most. Many of the world's tanker fleets are old, small, and stretched dangerously thin. A large share of them are based on designs more than half a century old, built for a world of closer wars and friendlier skies. Now the distances are growing, the threats are growing, and the demand for fuel in the air is climbing year after year. The number of aircraft that can actually deliver that fuel is not keeping up. It is one of the quietest vulnerabilities in modern military power, and it is sitting in plain sight on runways all over the world. So let us pull all the way back and ask the only question that really matters. What does any of this tell us about power? It tells us that out of every air force on Earth, only a small handful can truly fight far from home. Owning fighters is common. Plenty of countries field impressive numbers of capable aircraft, and they will happily show you the count. But owning enough tankers to send those aircraft somewhere distant and to keep them there long enough to matter is rare. It is expensive. It is unglamorous. It never makes a headline. Which is exactly why it is one of the most honest measures of real military reach that exists. So the next time you see a country's air power summed up as a number of fighter jets, treat that number with suspicion. It is the answer to the wrong question. The right question, the one that actually decides whether any of those aircraft matter in a fight far from home, is much simpler and much harder to answer. How do they get there? And how long can they stay? Because when you strip away the speed and the stealth and the spectacle, the most important aircraft in any war turns out to be the one with nothing on board but fuel. Next time on Hardpoint, we look at the other side of this story. What happens when a nation decides to build a wall of sky, designed specifically to push those tankers back and keep them out? The layered kill chain of modern air defense, taken apart one ring at a time. We will see you then.